It is a great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, who is an alumnus of our MRP program only 30 years ago, 1994. Baye Adofo-Wilson is a commercial real estate developer, lawyer, and urban planner. Recently, he completed the Hinchliffe Stadium neighborhood restoration project in Paterson, New Jersey, a $110 million project that included the restoration of Hinchliffe Stadium, a National Historic Landmark, and home to Negro League baseball teams. 75 senior low-income housing units were part of that project, and a 4,500 square foot museum dedicated to Negro League baseball. Mr. Adofo-Wilson was Newark, New Jersey's deputy mayor and director of economic and housing development from 2014 to 2017. He is also a 2014 Loeb Fellow. Mr. Adofo-Wilson was the co-founder and executive director of the Lincoln Park Coast Cultural District, where he spearheaded a comprehensive mixed-use community redevelopment strategy that included building LEED certified affordable housing buildings, urban farming, multi-genre music festivals, and a green workforce development project in a historic low-income Black community in Newark. Mr. Adofo-Wilson is the former New Jersey director of the Regional Plan Association. He is also a U.S. Army veteran and has degrees from Rutgers, Cornell, and the University of Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Baye Adofo-Wilson.
Thank you. 30 years go by fast. So it's been a long time since I've been here. I've been in this, well, not necessarily in this space, but at the colloquium. Most of the students, I'm assuming most of the people here are taking this for credit. That's how it used to be when I was going to school here, is that most of the people came here on Fridays and took the class for credit. And it was a big deal for me to come here because of the diversity of the professors and what they were talking about. So it was a good break from the sort of week-to-week your classes. So I'm sort of honored to be here and be a part of the colloquium. I'm gonna move over here a little bit, but this one. Let me. I'm sorry a little bit. Just not doing it. I'm trying to turn this off. This one. Hello. Yes. Yeah. All right. So I just want to step over here a little bit. So how I got into building resilient Black communities and working toward the experience towards Hinchliffe Stadium is that I was just really sort of concerned about how, what was happening in Black communities. When I was initially, my first sort of position was after high school, I went in the Army. I was talking to Jeff and telling him that when I went in the military, I went in right after high school, the urban environment looked different. The military is sort of different between sort of pre-9/11 and post-9/11. But when I went in the military, in this picture, there's three of us from Paterson. I'm sort of in the middle. I don't know if you could, you can see it, but this is me somewhere in there. That's me. So I was talking to my daughter. I was 18 years old and I already had a receding hairline, so that's just a mess. But I was there. This guy right here, and actually this one who got cut off. We all grew up in Paterson. In my basic training battery, there were 5 of us from Paterson, more than Chicago, more than LA, more than New York, more than Miami, and it's the town of 150,000 people. And the drill sergeants would come up to us and say, "Why are you guys here?" And we would collectively say there were no jobs in Paterson. It was sort of a post-manufacturing era, and there were no local jobs. So the 5 of us who, I grew up on the same street as Jose, one of the guys, ended up in the military in Fort Sill, Oklahoma at the same time because of a lack of jobs in the urban environment. And when I got to my permanent duty station, I realized, I started talking to other people, and I was in a light infantry I was in the Field Artillery Battalion in the Light Infantry Division. Not sure if you guys understand that, but essentially I was a combat soldier. And so what I noticed was that most of the black and brown people who were in those combat units were from Houston, who were from Chicago, were from LA, were from New York, were from Baltimore, were from DC. And they were all trying to, in one way, shape, or another, sort of escape the poverty of the communities that they were living in. And so they all made a decision to go into the military rather than deal with the dynamics that were in their community. None of them, or at least, this is sort of relatively speaking and anecdotal, but none of them was sort of super patriotic in a way that you sort of have the dynamic that sort of exists now. So and that's what I was saying between pre and post 9/11. So that dynamic sort of doesn't exist now. Back then, we were all trying to go because we were looking for the GI Bill. And we were looking for a way to afford to go to college. So the GI Bill was our pathway. It was our way to sort of work our way out of the community and to have jobs and pay for jobs. Pay for school. And that's why we went in. And so when I got out of college and I started talking to professors at Rutgers about, how I went in the military, and started talking about the dynamic that existed when I went in the military, I realized that the challenge was not just that I went in the military, but the communities and the cities that I and these other folks were living in were part of the challenge. That because they had lost all these jobs, because there was a concentration of poverty, because there was a lack of quality housing, issues around culture, policing, crime, education, all that led all these people to the same location. And so what I was trying to do is trying to figure out, how do you work to alleviate that? How do you work to change that particular condition in these different urban areas? And so that's how I ended up here 32 years ago in city and regional planning. So I was here from 92 to 94. I'm on the left looking at somebody, but I had a good experience here. Susan Christopherson was my advisor for the for the faculty. Pretty confident Goldsmith was the chair at the time. And one of the things that happened when I was here was Day Hall takeover. I'm not sure if the students know, but 30 years ago, the Latino students and there was a wall that we're in front of, and there was an artist, Daniel Martinez, and he had created this art piece, and it really created a maze throughout the central campus. But within the happening, it started getting vandalized, and people were writing "spick" and "nigger" on the art piece. And so we started complaining to the administration about the vandalism. One thing led to another. I'm actually walking across campus, not involved in the early protests, because I have an internship, a semester in South Africa. I go to Day Hall, and the next thing you know, we're in Day Hall 4 days, took over the building. They ended up being a Latino Living Center, a Latino Studies Department. All that came out of that protest. But it's something that happened and really changed me, and some of my best friends today are from that experience. And why it's important is because Cornell has such a rich history, so the protest and organization and the faculty and just the friendships. So, and a lot of my friends who I met here at Cornell still are in a space of social justice or activism or diplomacy, but in a space where they're sort of working for sort of a good. But when I went to South Africa, I get there at the end of 93, the beginning of 94, and it's before the country is gearing up for the election of Nelson Mandela. I go there, I'm in KwaZulu-Natal, I'm in Durban, and I'm in in a place where there's most of the fighting. The Inkatha Freedom Party is fighting the ANC. 25 to 35 people are being killed per day in the region that we're in. And I was working to actually build affordable housing in this area, and they grounded the program, and then I go off to work for this organization called NEON, the KwaZulu-Natal Election Observer Network. And in that job, I ended up, it's a long story, which I'm not going to get into right now, but I'm hitchhiking, and I'm picked up by Jacob Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa. And they take me to this event where Nelson Mandela is speaking, and because I'm with Jacob Zuma, this is them 30 years ago, I get to be in the VIP space, and we get relatively close to Nelson Mandela. But I saw how hard the South Africans were working to improve their communities, trying to end apartheid, but at the same time, really collectively. I mean, the ANC is one of those organizations back then where you can walk into a room like this and everyone would be in the ANC, and you didn't have to know anybody in the room. It just had that much influence, that much power, and much dedication at that point. And so it really fueled what I wanted to do when I came back to the United States, because I saw the level of sacrifice and dedication and commitment. So I come back, I go to law school, I go to UPenn, I work for a lawyer for 2 years, and then that's when I really get back into urban planning. So I worked my first job out, or my first really planning job out, is with the Regional Planning Association. RPA is the oldest regional planning organization in the country, founded in 1922, and it covers the shaded areas, North Jersey, New York City, Long Island, and Connecticut. And in that, the main aspect of the organization was really trying to build around the New York City economy. So looking at New York City as part of the epicenter of finance in the United States and culture. And so most of my jobs, most of my projects were really trying to increase and heighten the effectiveness and efficiency of New York City. One of my first projects was working on the Highlands, this sort of area right here, the preservation of the Highlands. It was mostly an advocacy campaign, but 3.5 million people get their water in New Jersey from this area, and New Jersey's really dense, and the goal was really to preserve the area. So we ended up doing some advocacy campaigns, and eventually the area has been preserved. And so this is another project. I talked to Jeff about this. This is Symphony Hall. This is in addition to the preservation portion of RPA, RPA was really looking at the region and looking at what are some of the strong core economic engines. One of those is arts and culture. And arts and culture was an engine, but also the cities around New York City were also contributing to the economy. So cities like Bridgeport, Paterson, Yonkers, and Newark. So in Newark, this is Newark Symphony Hall. It was an old black performance venue. Sarah Vaughan performed here, Diana Washington performed here. It was really the center of arts and culture in Newark for 50 years. And the state had funded an entity called the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. And in New Jersey Performing Arts Center, they spent $178 million in 1997 to build a new facility. Well, this facility, they let fallow. And the challenge was that because this facility, it has a 2,800-seat performance venue in here. It's called the Sarah Vaughan Hall, the Terrace Ballroom. But this facility was what they used to call on the Chitlin circuit. For those who, there was a circuit where a lot of black performances would go, like the old Tyler Perry shows, when he used to do theater and performances, they would be in places like this. And they're all over the country. These type of venues exist in Chicago, in DC, in Baltimore, in Durham, North Carolina, in Miami. They exist all over the country. And the state, because of the clientele that was coming there, made a decision to, instead of renovating this historic facility, made a decision to build a new facility on the same street a mile away. And so we were really advocating for the restoration of this facility at a time when, like I said, the state made a different decision. For me, this was a pivotal project because what I had seen in a lot of urban areas was that you come up with a plan, you come up with a strategy, and because it was in places like Newark or Paterson or Baltimore, and this goes back to the urban renewal days, those plans will never get implemented. So that people will study and prod and go through a certain analysis, and you would see the plan on the bookcase somewhere, just never getting done, or going back to that plan when you're trying to implement a new plan, just to see that the plan, the ideas were already there, but they were never implemented. And so that bothered me a lot. So this was something that was hard for me to let go. One of the things that we did was, I don't know if they still doing, y'all still doing charrettes? No, yes, y'all still doing charrettes out here? So they don't know what charrettes are. All right, so we would do these community design workshops where we would just come in and we would bring in a bunch of architects. This one was called the New Jersey Mayor's Institute of Design, where say the mayor had a problem around the train station on the commercial corridor. We would bring a group of designers, economic development specialists, and really try to come up with a plan. It was a really quick plan, but what it would do was spark ideas. And we would do it through all the urban areas in New Jersey. This one in particular is from South Orange, but we did this throughout the state. And it was a really important exercise because even for elected officials, them trying to figure out how do you fix this particular block, how do you fix this particular intersection, how do you deal with our walkways, waterways, they didn't necessarily have the ideas. And so I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out. When I was at RPA, I spent most of my time sort of creating plans and advocating for the implementation of those plans. And it was an important part of the job because, at least I believed as a planner, that implementing these plans were important key to sort of seeing the work done. I didn't feel comfortable not implementing the plans. I felt like it was important to try to implement the plans. The biggest challenge here was that a lot of the existing corporations liked business the way it was. They didn't necessarily want to change. And so even though we were out here trying to create a plan to improve the community, the business community oftentimes was comfortable with the way it was in some of these places. And so they weren't really advocating or supportive of the challenges of improving the communities. And I say this to say is that, so for me, this was really a breaking point, and I decided that I wanted to go back and sort of finish the Lincoln Park plan. And so what I did was I took the Lincoln Park plan, and we created we took the neighborhood plan, got it adapted into a redevelopment plan, and this is sort of the area in downtown Newark. Symphony Hall is right here. This is Symphony Hall. So we went to the city. We did neighborhood participatory planning meetings for 4 years. The second Tuesday of the month, and it was an exercise where we would have community residents, stakeholders come in that process of the neighborhood plan. That neighborhood plan became a redevelopment plan, and they called for the redevelopment of this area. We had housing, we had ideas for housing, open space preservation, and more entertainment. And one of the things we were trying to do was, because Symphony Hall was a performance venue, we decided that we would program Symphony Hall and the restoration of Symphony Hall from the outside in. And so we created the Lincoln Park Music Festival. It was a hip hop, house, gospel, and R&B concert festival. We did it, the first one was in 2006. It's in its 19th year now. In its height, we had 50,000 people who would come out there to sort of dance. This is a DJ, Joe Classell, but it's a house music. This is the house music day, but this would be our most popular day. And it would really transcend the community because this is inside a park on Broad Street, across the street from Symphony Hall, and you had just had a bunch of black and brown people dancing in the streets, dancing in the park, and really transforming the use of the park, but also and revitalizing the park and energizing the park, but also the main corridor, and really showcasing the sort of the power of the programming, if only the city or the state or the federal government will listen to it. Because at that point in time, they really weren't listening to the notion that you can bring people to this event and it would be safe, because most of the time it's like, oh, is it going to be safe? Is it going to be a challenge? And a lot of these people are my age, but even back then, we're in our 30s and 40s back then, who are in their 50s and 60s now. And even that demographic, there was always a concern about, well, if you had this many, black and brown people out at the park in the middle of the day, what would happen? And so what we had to show was someone that would be safe, it would be fun, it would be entertaining, but we also wanted to make sure that we could start the economic development engine, the redevelopment of the community from the inside out. And that we would start with the people who lived there who were already enjoying it. And it was a huge success. At one point, it's the biggest sort of black music event in the state of New Jersey. The other thing we did was we built affordable housing, or mixed-use buildings. We built LEED buildings. These were the first LEED buildings in Newark, geothermal, solar, bamboo cabinetry, recycled concrete countertops. It's on the brownfield site. And so it was really the first ones. We did a LEED ND neighborhood project. It was the first LEED ND in New Jersey, and these are the first LEED buildings in Newark. One of the interesting things that happened was when the market collapsed, and we were trying to do a refinance of the project, the appraisers wouldn't take into consideration that it was green buildings. So they said, well, this building is in Newark, and that's more important than it being green. And so when we went to refinance, they sort of stripped out all of the green aspects that we had financed to put into the building and said, none of that matters. They looked at it and said, oh, it's a two-family house like any two-family house in Newark. So it's just one of the things that when you're doing work in urban communities, trying to figure out the market analysis, trying to do appraisals, and then being the first to do this, it can be a challenge because you're ahead of the curve, you're being an innovator, but at the same time, market forces may not understand and support what you're doing. But this was, I think, a success and really an important project because now, this is, as you can see, 16 years ago. And so these units are occupied and look great. All right, so in addition to that, we did farming. This is a long time ago too, but this is, we did farm. We had a farm too. We were doing a local CSA. We acquired 26 lots from the City of Newark, and one was about a half an acre, and we built a farm on it. And in building we had a local CSA, so we would take the food that we grew, and we would take it to the local church, and the local church would then distribute it to its congregation. And so it was something that we just felt like we needed to do. That one of the challenges in urban environments, in addition to housing, was just sort of the nutrition, the quality of the food. And so we did this as a way of as a comprehensive community economic development strategy. The organization was and is a sustainable community development corporation. So a lot of the work that we did was around green products, urban ag, and as well as sustainable buildings. We also had a green jobs training program where these guys, except for there's a councilwoman and a Van Jones, and we did green jobs training program where we would train people. So we were building the first green buildings in Newark. And so our thought process was that by building these green buildings, if people got trained on those, then the coming green buildings, they'll have a level of expertise on it. So we trained these guys and other folks to work on those green buildings, and a lot of them went on to be really successful, have their own construction companies. At Lincoln Park, we were really, for the most part, doing placemaking. It was arts, it was culture, it was housing, it was sustainability, it was music, it was all of those things. So we really changed that neighborhood, but that neighborhood was a lot different now than it was 20 years ago, and a lot of it's to the work that this organization did. I spent a lot of time fundraising, sort of the point in time in my career where I'm doing less of the implementation and more of just a fundraising. So one of the things that can happen in terms of being a planner and working is that you can slip into an administrative role. So I don't know if they have any classes around that, but you can sort of slip into a sort of hard, strong administrative role because you actually have more experience than most of the people that work for you. So just sort of thinking about what it means to fundraise as a part of the overall neighborhood and community development that has to happen, because oftentimes what's the challenge in these urban communities is that they don't have enough money. And I tell people the biggest thing about this was the challenging part was the timing. We started the organization in 2004, 2005, and this organization and the art scene in general in Newark is so different. Like I look on social media and I see all these artists having, open with there's pop-up galleries, there's a lot more music events. Lincoln Park organization is considered like the godfather of the house music scene in New Jersey. And I see it as I'm going to bed. Like I see it, it's 10 o'clock at night, I'm like, I can't go to any of these events. I'm aged out, and so I can't really enjoy them the way I wouldn't mind doing them. But it is exciting to watch a new generation of people enjoy the work. So one of the things that may happen is that the work that you actually do is not necessarily work that you get to enjoy in the present moment, because that work is really for the next generation. And so if you're sort of creating these environments where you're building housing or you're doing music or you're doing artwork, and it'd be great and fine, but by the time it has the traction it needs for the neighborhood to change, it may not be the point in life where you're doing it. Because a lot of reasons why we even did some of this work was because we would have to go to New York City to enjoy ourselves. And so being only 6-7 miles from New York City, we wanted to enjoy ourselves in New Jersey, so we tried to create an environment in New Jersey that allowed us to not have to go to New York City, but the timing didn't work. So now I've aged out of partying past 10 o'clock at night. This is an interesting part in my career. I also, in the nonprofit space, kind of burnt out. It was, we were working 18 hours a day. It was sort of a challenging period of time. And so I took a break, and a break it felt like a sabbatical, but that's the year I did the Loeb Fellowship. So I did the Loeb Fellowship from 2013 to 2014, and then when I came back, I left the Loeb Fellowship on May 31st. I became deputy mayor and director of economic and housing development in Newark on July 1st. So it was really just a month. That's Raz Baraka. He's running for governor now. But I ran the economic development department his first term, and we were just really the young guns. I was also on the zoning board early on in my career, during the planning board, and at that point in time, it was Councilman Cory Booker, who is now a senator. He appointed me to the zoning board. So we were the young guns going to take over the world, and these are some of the projects that we were working on. One of the main projects, the first project I worked on when I was in Newark, was this project called the Valentine's Day Sale. One of the things I was trying to do was trying to change the image of Newark. Newark is considered a brick city. It is considered a sort of hard and rough area. So what I did was I came up with this idea that what if we softened the image, and we developed a project that softened Newark image, but also create a level of momentum and excitement about Newark. So on Valentine's Day in 2015, we were selling lots, $1,000 a lot for the first 100 folks. And we sort of put it out there. And at the time, I didn't think it was going to be a big deal, but it turned, it was a Saturday, Valentine's Day that year was a Saturday. And I remember I was leaving the office on Friday around 5 o'clock, and people had started lining up already. And it was cold. It was probably like 15, 20 degrees out. And people were lining up for this program that was supposed to start the next morning. And so I was really in shock. I ended up saying, okay, let me stay out here. So we ended up spending the night out there with them. And we had more than 100 people show up. And we sold all those lots. We sold all those lots at that point in time. The challenge was, which I get to later, is that a lot weren't able to build it. We sold vacant lots where if you got a lot for $1,000, you had to build on that lot. And what most people didn't have the capacity to do was actually build a house. So even though we sold it, they didn't have an opportunity to build it. So I put both of them in here because to me, this was a successful project. On the marketing side, it worked. Newark was seen as a much different city in 2024 than it was in 2014 and in 2012 or 2004. So the city's image has changed, and this project is one of the reasons why. And at the time, the city had 2,000 lots, and now they don't even have any. So eventually it did, but the other part was because we didn't have the right infrastructure in City Hall to help people build houses, a lot of people felt like they were jilted. It's also how the media portrays cities and sort of look for ways to tear down or say something's not successful. This article was written 5 years later, And so I wasn't even in City Hall. But it was, and I spoke to a reporter about it. And, but there was something that, there's a glare, there's a spotlight on these cities. And there's a lot of media attention to a lot of them. And part of what you want to do is present the best project and the best program, but understand there still will be some level of criticism, some level of concern, because these cities have been in these conditions for a long time. So when I was in the background is the Paterson Center where the Newark, New Jersey Devils play, but this is a project called Mulberry Commons. One of the things that happened in Newark was that I spent a lot of time working on these type of projects. I really went into City Hall trying to work on the community scale projects, trying to do more community economic development activities. But what happened, which I was not expecting, was that there was all these sort of complicated real estate transactions that needed to occur, that had been sitting on someone's desk for years, but there was the city or the developer or the state didn't have the sophistication to figure them out, or there wasn't the political will to figure them out. And so what needed to happen was someone needed to sort of pay attention to them. In my eyes, these projects were very critical, important to the city of Newark, because without them, these projects were important to creating a level of momentum and excitement about what was happening in Newark. And so this ended up being one project. It was the most complicated project that I had done to date, where we created this 3-acre park. It's in the middle of downtown. Right now they have house music concerts there as well. But it was multiple land transfers. It was the state. It was a bond deal. There was a multiple entities. But what it did do was it showed me how, I learned through this transaction how to work on complicated deals. I spent a lot of time doing these type of projects. And because I spent so much time working on them, it really set me up for Hinchliffe Stadium. So as I said, I spent most of my time doing project management, but a lot of time working on these type of projects. This project is important because it too is a historic preservation project. There's a preservation of the Haynes building. It has a Whole Foods in it. Rutgers is in it. But for me, it was the blueprint for Hinchliffe Stadium, and it was the financial structure that was key to me, sort of helping me figure out how to structure Hinchliffe Stadium. All right, so for the last 5 years, I've been working on this project. Hinchliffe Stadium is as I said, it's a WPA project. It's the Olmsted Brothers project. It's really one of the, it was the center of Paterson for a long time. It was built because 100 years ago, Eastside High School and what is now Kennedy High School had a football rivalry, and there was no place to watch the game. And just like in a lot of towns, 10,000 people would show up to a high school football game in the 1920s, and they had no place to play that was big enough to house it. So the city built the stadium with WPA dollars, and they built it as a mixed-use stadium. Football, basketball, motorcycle racing. It was a precursor to NASCAR. But one of the things about Hinchliffe Stadium, which is important, is that these are graduation ceremonies, night games. You were still in the hill. Paterson is also at the Watchung Mountain Range, and so there's a lot of cliffs that are around. One of the things that happened relatively early was that Negro League baseball teams started playing at the stadium. At the time, Yankee Stadium cost between $2,500 and $3,500 to rent for a game, and Hinchliffe Stadium was $100. And so, and there's 13 miles from, and the George Washington Bridge had recently opened. And so it's 13 miles from the George Washington Bridge. There's a street that's a block away from Hinchliffe Stadium that turns into, it's Broadway, it turns into Route 4, which it goes straight to George Washington Bridge, which will allow people, these teams, to play at Yankee Stadium as well as to play at Hinchliffe Stadium. So a promoter for a Negro League team will be able to get the attraction out of New York, New Jersey. I tell people it's the same reason why the New York Giants and New York Jets play in New Jersey, the same reason why the Red Bull and Gotham play in New Jersey. It just has always been cheaper and within a close enough proximity for people to want to play there and to be able to afford to play there. But because of this region, it just had a bunch of stars. Satchel Paige played there, Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell, and Larry Doby, who is from Paterson. There are 20 there's 20 Negro League Hall of Fame. There's 37 Negro League players that are in the Major League Hall of Fame. 20 of those 37 play at Hinchliffe Stadium. So that's why it's a National Historic Landmark. Just the sheer amount of talent that played at this 10,000 seat stadium in the middle of Paterson is unique, in addition to it being Art Deco, poured in cast concrete, built like the Coliseum style, like the LA Coliseum. And so between the architectural design, as well as the players that play there, that's why it's a National Historic Landmark. Football games. When I was growing up, it was really the center of football. I didn't go to either one of these teams. I went to another school called Passaic County Technical and Vocational High School. But you would go to these games, and it'd be the class of '73 and the class of '85 and the class of '92, and you would just see them, and they would just be talking to each other. And at the time, the schools had great bands, and the bands would be there performing. In 1997, though, the stadium, the state took over the school district in 1991, and in 1997, it caused a sinkhole developed in the stadium. It cost $4 million to fix the sinkhole, and it cost $4.8 million to tear the stadium down. The state did neither, and it sat like this for 20 years, almost 25 years. And as you can tell, it's built. Some of it's poured in concrete, but some of the concrete is on earth, and so the trees would just grow up through. They use it for, some of the TV shows were used as a backdrop. Walking Dead used it as a backdrop. Some of these scenes, so you may see it, remember it from Walking Dead. So when I left Newark City Hall, and I grown up in this community, a similar woman, Shavonda Sumner, asked me if I was interested in coming back home. I hadn't really even thought about it, but she said, are you interested in coming back home, and can you help us figure this project out? So I pulled together a team, and we came up with a mixed-use project, which is the stadium, housing, a parking garage, and this museum project. I heard there's some real estate. I don't know if there's any here, but I heard the real estate students may be here. So I wanted to list you guys the financial tranche so you can sort of see it. So the project's $110 million. It includes state tax credit, new markets tax credits, historic grants. It's 75 units of housing. We ran everything through a bond. But this is the capital stack. Oftentimes, these projects take this level of brain damage to get done. They sort of take this level of brain damage to get done. But they're important projects, and what I wanted to do was make sure that the project succeeded. So I put together this sort of stack to make it. So it's a $110 million project with $15 million of debt. This is the financial structure too. This too is for the real estate students. This is the low-income housing tax credit structure. This is the housing tax credits, the LIHTC structure. We have a 75-year lease from the school district. The school district owns the land. We have a 75-year lease. On the stadium, on the housing and parking garage, we own fee simple. The LIHTCs have there's a 15-year tax credit, but the tax credit investor has 99%, you have 1%. So I just wanted to sort of show you guys the different entities. This is the new market structure. I mean, this is new market. This is the historic tax credit structure. So the funds have to go from the stadium or to the historic master to the historic tax credits to the new market tax credits. But this is I think this is important to see in terms of how complicated, how many different entities are involved. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4 entities that are there. And then these are, the daycare's a tenant, the restaurant's a tenant, but this is what it looks like. And these are the users down here, Montclair State, restaurant, parking. Right now, we finished the stadium in 2023. There's 1,700 seats. There's football, track and field, soccer. This is some of the construction stuff. This is also more the historic preservation portion of it. These 75 units of housing. The parking garage. This is the museum. The track. This is completed. The locker rooms, the housing again, museum. This is what the project looks like now. So this is an area view. Montclair State, these are the events that are happening there now. So this is a football game. We have a baseball team there, the New Jersey Jackals. They are a local minor league, Frontier League team. This is their home field. The school district has the stadium for 100. Go back. The school district has the stadium for 180 days. So the local high school Kennedy, they play there. But also because it was historically a football stadium, a lot of the top football teams in the state, they play there as well. We've been working with the Yankees to have more events there for kids. So we're leaning more into soccer. We had a Barcelona SC team play there, the national team from Ecuador, and we had 8,000 people that filled up the stadium. We had Guatemala played Ecuador, and we had 4,000 people come to that game. And this is when we opened the museum. So the museum is, we designed the museum as a sort of like a social justice children's museum. It's really for junior high school kids, and it really looks at, uses Negro League Baseball to look at Jim Crow and segregation. So it gives us a viewpoint. A lot of the baseball players, Negro League baseball players, were also, who went up in the initial integration of MLB, were military veterans. Jackie Robinson, Larry Doby, and you also have the same story with MLB. There's a lot of MLB players and Hall of Famers who were in the military during World War II and then went back and played. And so they have experience and stories. Right here, you see one that says sort of segregation in service. That's a story from Larry Doby. But we're really trying to look at how, through the integration of MLB and Negro League Baseball, that integration, what were the challenges, what were the victories, and what were the experiences of these Hall of Famers. These pictures here are the pictures of the Hall of Famers, some of the Hall of Famers that played at Hinchliffe Stadium. And also because of all the racing in football, these are those pictures. This is the ribbon cutting. So just in conclusion, these are the jobs that I had, that were urban planning jobs. The reason I wanted to organize it this way is I want you guys to sort of see that, I initially started off in regional planning as a policy director. Then I was a nonprofit developer. Then I was in the public service as a government employee running the City of Newark Economic Development Department, and now I'm in the private sector. But there's all these different ways that you can use a planning degree. There's a lot of different ways that you can use it. And so, and even though I think if you look at the projects that I prioritize, they're the same projects, they're just in different jobs. So I'm prioritizing open space, I'm prioritizing sustainability, I'm prioritizing historic restoration, I'm prioritizing affordable housing, but I'm doing it from different viewpoints, or the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit, even from policy. And so I just think when you sort of think about your careers and how you use the planning degree, that it doesn't have to be one way to approach it, that you can approach it from multiple ways. And also, you don't have to do the same thing forever. You can change based on where you are at in your life. That's it. Questions?
Thank you. So, do we need this microphone?
I have one up here. Yeah. Here.
Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. I'm Della Alderson. I'm a first-year MRP student, and I really enjoyed your presentation. I had a question about the neighborhood participatory planning process that you talked about, and that I went on for 4 years. And then there's those awesome projects like the music festival and the CSA. I was wondering if you could speak more about how that process, like the logistics of how you did all of that work with the neighborhood to bring those really awesome programs into fruition.
Okay, so thank you for the question. I'm gonna start with the participatory planning question. So when I was at RPA, we started doing these meetings. We started doing them every Tuesday. We did that actually at a drug treatment program. So it was a drug treatment program in the neighborhood, and they had a classroom. And so we would have the meetings there. So the second Tuesday of every month. So some months it was a election day, and so we would have to sort of move it around. It was at 10 o'clock on the second Tuesday of the month, which wasn't always convenient. So some months we would have night meetings. So it wasn't just a professional. So that probably 70% of them were in the day, 30% of them were at night. That meeting became interesting because we started to be so successful that not only were the residents coming there, but developers started coming to the meetings as well. And so one of the ways I got into development was because we had one lot that we wanted to do for the CSA. And so we wanted to do this one lot for the CSA, and the developers heard that we were trying to acquire the lot from the city, and so they went to the city and said, well, we want that lot. And it was just the one lot. And so we had an open, public participatory project. Anybody could come, anybody could listen. What we didn't take into consideration that everybody that was coming to the meeting wasn't necessarily our friend or working in our best interest. And we were just trying to do a community garden, just the CSA, just some urban farming. So the director at the time, whose job I eventually had, say 10 years later, told me what was happening. And he said, you know what, just take all the land. He said, they have enough. So instead of, we went there to get one lot, we ended up giving us 26. And so that's what's really started. We ended up building 100 units of housing too. So ended up building 100 units of housing, 66 affordable, all of them green, LEED, silver, gold, and condos, mixed-use buildings. But but because we did a participatory planning process, which I believed in and still believe in, there was also it was eye-opening to see that when we had such a transparent process, how that transparency was used against us. But in those meetings, we also came with the idea of programming outside before the inside, and sort of building up the need in the community, because really we're doing all this stuff so Stephanie Hall could be restored. And in that meeting is when the idea came up. In addition to Symphony Hall, that neighborhood was considered the Gold Coast in Newark, and it wasn't just Symphony Hall. There were other jazz clubs in the area. Newark probably had a disproportionate number of jazz artists in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. And so in addition to Sarah Vaughan and Wayne Shorter, and Diana Washington, you had all these jazz artists who were performing, James Moody, who were all performing in and around this community. And so we took that history of performance, Newark Symphony Hall, and then put it to a free event in the community.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. My name is Luke Early. I'm also a first-year MRP student here. You had mentioned that in some of your early RPA projects, that the business community was actually a source of resistance on a lot of those projects. Could you talk about how maybe you got them on board? If you didn't get them on board, how that ended up happening?
Yeah, I had something different there to begin with. I should have leaned. I feel like one of my challenges or regrets that I didn't lean into that more. I think, but there's a couple of reasons. In the Highlands, there's a lot of development that the open space preservation was stopping, right? So what's happening in a lot of these open space areas, in a lot of these green areas, is that you do a development project, they don't have the infrastructure. So you have to build the infrastructure, you have to build the sewers, the roadways, and oftentimes the municipal entities, the taxpayers have to pay for it. But the developers are also against it. So in that way, they were supportive of the development. They were supportive of the growth. And some of the corporate community was supportive of the growth because their businesses would improve on that growth. So that's where the attention was at in the Highlands. In Newark, this project was considered on the Chitlin Circuit. And so the NJ-PAC was really an attempt, and has been relatively successful in bringing in a suburban population into downtown Newark. So they felt that there was too much of a stigma on Symphony Hall to have it become something different or more than what it had been. And so they opted for a new facility at the expense of this facility still being in the same condition 20 years later. And it's at this point, it too will be 100 years old in, I think, 28. So oftentimes there are real, concrete, quantifiable issues that the corporate community may have that's in conflict with community residents, and sort of navigating that. At the time, early on, I just got upset about it because I felt like it was exploitative, and I didn't figure out how to negotiate it and talk about it.
Sophie, can I ask a question? Or somebody else?
I can go.
Yep. Oh, okay. Hi, my name's Alex. Thank you so much for your talk. I'm also a first-year MRP student. And crazy enough, I have some family in Maplewood, so I've seen your project in South Orange, which is super cool. So I'm going to text them that. But I had a question about working within communities, especially economically depressed neighborhoods. I used to do outreach work in North St. Louis, and when you talk to a lot of the community members, and they have like a lot of ambitious projects and things they want to do, but when you're working with developers, you have to convince them that some of those areas you want to work in have to have the economic viability. How do you work with developers in bringing new projects in neighborhoods that are considered risky?
Okay, yeah, that's a two-part. How I've ended up in development is because I tried to do that earlier on in my career and wasn't as successful. And so, because when we were having those community meetings, we were trying to convince developers to do development projects in Lincoln Park. The developers wouldn't do it, and so we sort of took it upon ourselves. So that's just one answer is that you may need to find a different type of a developer or a new developer, or take on the project yourself, or have the city, someone else take it on, because oftentimes those developers that you're talking to are not interested in it. The position where I was in, where I had to convince developers to do stuff, was in New York City when I was deputy mayor. And so, one, there was some level, I used more of it was more incentivized than anything else. So we provided some level of subsidies, whether it was grants or tax abatements, to help developers to offset those costs, because oftentimes, the construction costs are construction costs, right? And so, especially if it's, and prevailing wage or union jobs, those jobs are often more expensive than non. And so, if the city or the municipality had some way of reducing the cost to make it economically viable for the developer, we did that to increase the activity. But we also had to educate them and educate other developers in the importance of it. It's when you're working with developers, it's really on their level, it's their time and their resources, and so they have to want to do it. And so it's hard to convince them to do something they don't want to do because they don't have to do it. What normally works, or what can work, is creating enough momentum so that that project is profitable or seen as going to be successful. And that's kind of what we're doing with the music advancement program. We were programming the community prior to, so that even the developers and the city can see the significance of it. What I didn't get into in Lincoln Park was that Lincoln Park, it was called the Bottom, so that's the neighborhood. So I tell people it was called the Bottom in Newark, and that meant something, right? So if something in Newark is called the Bottom, and the Bottom is considered the Bottom, and it was called the Bottom in Newark. And so, but it's also on Broad Street, the main street in City. It's the closest neighborhood to Newark Airport. And so geographically, it's accessible, but it was a poor black community. And so convincing developers to do something in it was a challenge. But by creating all these smaller programs, I think it was really important. The other thing I think, which is the flip side, which I'm not sure if you were asking, but you applied it in terms of the ambition of the residents, is that some of the stuff has to be short term. What can you do in the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months that is tangible, that the community can see in order for them to continue to have the faith that the community is going to change. And I think oftentimes, we come up with concepts and plans, but it's like when governments change, they have like a 100-day plan. And we don't think about that in the context of our communities. So if you say, all right, we're gonna have this plan, what are we gonna do in the first 100 days? Or what are we gonna do in the first 6 months so that that plan lands in a way that the people who participate in that plan can see the benefits of their time for participating in it, but the immediate change in their community.
Can I go? So thank you for this talk. It was just really wonderful, and thank you for coming back and speaking with all of us. So I have a comment and a question. Oh, and my name's Nima Kudva. I teach in the department. And so I have a comment and a question. I think the comment is, you started with the things at Cornell that really shaped you, and you spoke about the day hall takeover and then your time in South Africa. And it's so interesting to me because earlier this week on Wednesday, Sophie brought up exactly those same two issues in the first year class that we teach together, to talk about sort of what are the things that are fundamental to shaping what we become. So thank you for that. I think there's a lovely connection there. In terms of the question, I think it's slightly, asking you to reflect a little bit, I think, on this slide actually, and on something our speaker from last week said. So, you've sort of demonstrated to us in the spirit of the talk, really about how you held on to principles and made sure that those principles of equity, of justice, kind of worked their way through every role that you took. But your roles span the public, the private, the for-profit, the non-profit, right? Our speaker last week was adamant that you could not do such spanning, that you had to remain, in his case, in the non-profit sector to hold the state and the government accountable. And that position was really important. So I'm struck by this, right? For him, the revolving door was a problem. But you've demonstrated to us such a nice way in which you can hold on to principles and go through those various kinds of portals. So I'm very curious, actually, to hear you reflect a little bit on the pros and cons of doing something like that. Given that, the position we hear also is that of remaining in one thing and holding on to it, right?
Was he talking about planning?
He was talking about development, so in India, rural India, but development work. So yes, like planning. Being a change agent, right? That's what we are as planners.
For me, I feel like I learned in all these spaces. So I don't feel like, even though I had a rich educational environment here and before and after, these environments are really still, these experiences are very important. So for example, the Regional Planning Association is a regional planning organization, and they think about large-scale infrastructure projects that are designed to change or impact the region. In a lot of ways, that's what Hinchliffe is. So Hinchliffe is a multi-use project with a stadium next to the falls in Paterson. It's in the center of tourism in New Jersey, in Paterson. And so I sort of took the ideas from RPA and brought it down to the for-profit stuff that I'm working on. And I don't know if I would have started if I would have just stayed there, this other project would have gotten done, And so what I did do, and I grew up in this community, so this is a community that I went to high school in. And so I was able to sort of take those experiences and grow as an individual and learn. The deputy mayor position was an important position for me because as we were in this sort of class, in this environment, I had to listen, and my job was really to try to figure out how to get things done again with people who I didn't necessarily like. I used to tell them, I don't have to be nice to you, but did you get your project done? Yes. All right, leave my office. And so I would just tell them to leave. But but I had to learn how to it really challenged me in terms of coming up with ideas and solutions to get things done. So I think if you just stay, for some people, staying in one position and sort of fighting the fight and fighting the good fight, I get how that works for them and their sort of a level of, I don't know, a sanctity around it, or a level of commitment. But I think for me, more than anything else, I like to be productive. And I do like to to participate in tangible change. And so I think when I got to when a position felt like I wasn't able to sort of contribute to that tangible change, even though I had the ideas and issues that I was working on, that it was best for me to be in a different position because I could still have these tangible changes in the environment. And I believe in, I guess I also believe in the built environment. So I believe in, changing and participating in how the built environment changes. And those things are projects, And so when you think about it that way, they have beginnings, middles, ends. I mean, the biggest challenge I have with Hinchliffe Stadium, which I glossed over right now, is that it's property management, because we now have to figure out how to run the stadium. But I believe in it enough that we may do something else that's around this, that does the same thing, that helps the operations.
Thank you.
Right there, right here in front of you.
Hi. Hi, my name is Alexandra. I'm a first-year MRP student. So I had a question around just the community's perception of your work and how you navigated, so the community would perceive developers a certain way and mayors a certain way. So how did you navigate against kind of challenging those perceptions? What strategies were important in building credibility, or successful in building credibility, and what strategies weren't successful?
Okay. I'll start with the successful one first. I think because I started off in the community space, that I had enough of a reputation that so the people in the communities knew me. So by having those 4 years of participatory planning meetings, I facilitated those meetings, people saw that. So I had enough of a reputation in Newark that when I became deputy mayor, people knew me from Lincoln Park. I wasn't an unknown agent, and then I wasn't an unknown agent. At the same time, and so there is something to be said about having a history of work that people can see and reflect on as a mechanism for judgment. On the flip side, that does not mean that everyone will feel that way, and it doesn't mean that the new position won't change you. And so, in terms of the community, when I became deputy mayor, there was definitely a contingent of people who knew me, who felt that now that I was deputy mayor and I was running the department, that I was somehow different, or that the position had changed me. And all I can do is just do the work, So the other thing is that there has to be some level of consistency about the work that you do, so that even when people are fearful of the structure or fearful of the position or concerned about position, that if you're producing similar type of work, that you have to let that speak for itself, because for me, it was like you don't read the comment section. You can't go but so low into it, because the judges may not even be fair, and it may not even be about you. It could just be about the position. So this is, as you said, this is what mayors do, and this is what developers do, and so you can not have any of that experience, that history in you as an individual, but because that's what that position does, people may feel that that's who you are, but at least for me, I couldn't let that slow me down. I said, well, let's continue to produce, and then at the end of it, see where we're at. And at the end of those positions, people felt a lot more comfort. On the development end, I think it's been, I'm in Paterson, so there's a part of that is because I'm in a place where I went to high school. Like there are people who have known me since I was 12 or 13, and so I get probably a pass there. I think that but there is concern that I'm a real estate developer, and I'm a real estate developer with the largest project in the city of Paterson history, and so it reads that way, and I think that. What I can do better and more is I should be doing more community stuff. Like I should be out in the community more, doing more of those events. So I'm starting to do more of that now. Is to sort of going back to my roots and doing more activities in the communities. So and not be so detached. But for me, these projects are complicated. So the financing tranche, the operations, and so it's been like a time management issue. How do I get back to doing so? So I am starting to do stuff like more poetry readings, more community events, more free events at the stadium, more free events at the museum, so that and the museum is a children's museum, so that part works, but just doing more events so that people can see me and I can see them, and that we can have a better rapport.
I think we have a question here, and then there, if that's okay. I can make it.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
2 questions. My experience with people go into development, they concentrate in construction or financing or management or all 3. I'm curious about what you and your company are concentrating on in terms of the spectrum of activities that are required so that something gets developed. And secondly, going back to the beginning of your career at RPA, I think if my memory is correct, Rob Pirani, who was also a graduate of this program, who many of the students met in New York City recently, must have been one of your colleagues.
Well, I was a my colleague.
And so my question is, I was struck by your figure that you showed the map of the Highlands in the New York City region, New York City, New Jersey region, and you said 3.5 million people draw their public water from those areas. Where are those primarily? Because I know that New York City and the areas just north of New York City don't draw their water from there. They draw or not primarily from there, but primarily from the Catskills. And I know so, and I'm curious about Newark and the cities in New Jersey where they get their water, because one of the great historic battles in the eastern United States that most citizens are not aware of is Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania consider New York State and New York City the absolute evil empire when it comes to water issues because of what happened in the Delaware River 100 years ago, and continues to happen today. That's where New York City gets most of its water. So the first question is about what you're doing now, where you're concentrated, and then the question about...
Let's start with the end and go back. These are New Jersey residents, so the 3.5 are people in New Jersey. The Newark watershed is up in the Highlands, and so all of Newark, like Essex County, Bergen County, most of Passaic County. So those, I don't know if you know the county, Bergen County has almost 1 million people. Passaic County, Essex County has almost 1 million people. Passaic County has about 600,000 people. Morris, and then Union. So those are the counties where a lot of the water from the Highlands come down toward the eastern part of the state. So I'm also a lawyer. So one of the things that I think there's multiple types of real estate developers. There are real estate developers who are finance guys who really are about the transaction. They tend to make the most money, but those are the finance guys. I'm trying to lean into that, but I don't have, that's what I'm working on. But lawyers tend to know the process. And so I feel like if there's anything that I have sort of an expertise on, it's the process. From land acquisition, site plan approval. I do understand enough, construction, design, financing, and closings. And so in that regard, that's sort of where my expertise is at. So it's more the finance aspects of it. But there are developers who are general contractors who sort of come up as construction guys and then make their way up to general developers. And then there are architects who are designers who sort of understand that process. But I'm more on the law, process, entitlements, as well as financing. What was the other question, the middle one? There's one more, right? All right, Rob Pirani. Yeah, water. So I am there with Rob Perani. I don't know how much you know RPA, but I take over the state director's office after Tom Wright, who is now the president of RPA. So he's the New Jersey director, then I'm the New Jersey director, then Tom DeLessio. But Rob Perani's there, Rob Lane is there. Those are people who you guys may know who are at RPA when I'm at RPA. Anybody else? That's it?
Okay. Hi there. Nikhil, first year MRP, and thank you for your presentation. I have a question regarding, you mentioned about community design workshops. So could you talk a little bit about that and how you sort of negotiate between the communities that require much, underserved communities which require much services, and also could you talk a little bit about your background in law and the regulatory environment you work with, and because you have to negotiate between all that and with the community, and so could you explain?
All right,
Thank you.
Take your second part because it kind of follows up on yours. One of the things that helped me out was because I was in Newark City Hall, and so because I was in a government environment where projects have to get approved, I dealt with regulations and code enforcement, all the sort of things that happen in the context of a development project. And so that's where I sort of developed a level of expertise on it because you have hundreds of projects that come through, or thousands of projects that come through on a regular basis. So you try to sort of review all of them, or just look at them and see if they're right, or have someone else brief you on whether there's a problem. Most of the time, it didn't get to me unless there was a problem. But that's where I gained a lot of experience, just dealing with a sheer volume. Because one of the things I also did believe in and do believe in, it was a level of government efficiency around it, that a small business owner or a small real estate developer should get the same level of attention as a large developer. So, and it's probably even more important that if the small developer or a small business owner came in, that their projects got done at a quick time because that amount of money may mean more to their business. So that's why I got that focus in terms of paying attention and really trying to see how we can expedite projects for everybody, not just for the larger ones, because the larger ones would have lobbyists and people who could make phone calls and make a lot of noise, but for the smaller ones. So that's where that came from. In terms of me just being a lawyer, and I went straight to law. So I came from South Africa, and I went straight to law school. So I left South Africa. I started law school the fall of '94, and I went to Penn. And I was interested in I was already interested in economic development at that point. So most of my electives were in real estate or land use or environmental, and really sort of a continuation of a planning degree. So to the extent that I could take land use classes and how those land use classes overlapped with planning classes or real estate classes. So I took courses at the Wharton School. So I took environmental justice classes, I took environmental law classes, I took property. So I just sort of continued developing a level of expertise around real estate. But to the extent that when I am of counsel at a law firm today, post-Pollock, and when I do practice law, I do practice what they call redevelopment law, which is the redevelopment plan, the redevelopment plans that developers use to redevelop properties.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Elizabeth Conley. I'm also a first-year MRP student. You talked about earlier in your career creating spaces more for younger generations and then aging out of spaces that you've created. What would you say are good strategies to create spaces for older generations, to allow them to age in place in their primarily Black communities?
Yeah, I like that question. 'Cause as I'm aging up, I guess. I like. I believe that time is. Goes back to the comment earlier about time is of the essence. One of the challenges around communities is that people are in communities, and poor communities, and oftentimes they're there for a long time, and a lot of people don't make it, right? So a lot of people pass away, a lot of people move. Talk about my mother. We used to live in Harlem before we moved to Paterson, and when my I remember a situation when I was young. My aunt had gotten stabbed, and I remember going to the hospital with my mother, and just the sort of sheer fear on her face. She's from North Carolina. Her younger sister gets stabbed in New York City, and she just has this huge amount of fear in Harlem. And we ended up moving to New Jersey not long after. She's like, look, I can't do this. And her sister ended up moving back to North Carolina. And so when you look at these development projects that happen in the community, and we have these meetings and programs and say that this project is going to happen soon, or this program is going to happen soon, or we're going to open up this clinic, or we're going to open up this new housing, and the street's going to get clean. There's people in the community have heard that for 40, 50, 60 years. And they're just sort of tired of hearing it, and they need to have something more tangible to believe, because because a lot of them, if you say, all right, I'm going to buy your house, and it's, $50,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 or whatever more than what they paid for it, they'll take that and will move down south or move out to the west or move to an island. They'll go back home. And that's what my mother did. My mother's in North Carolina now. So so I think creating environments for seniors is important. Our project here is a senior housing unit. So we have 75 units of senior housing. We actually have our preschool childcare on the first floor and a senior in the building. But creating projects that are specifically around, I think senior housing is important in these gentrifying spaces, because I think that the people who have been there should have an opportunity to benefit from the amenities that are there, that will be there, that are there now, that wasn't there before. But I also know that their experiences are different. So for a lot of these older black and brown women and men, that community, even in the context of its gentrifying, they're still treated the same way in the public spaces, in a way that people who are new to the community are not treated. So creating an environment for them to also be treated differently and that people sort of see them is also important.
All right, thank you for coming. My name's Emily, and I'm a first-year MRP as well. I'm most familiar with the city of Hartford, which is sort of a similar dynamic to Newark, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned Newark having sort of a stigma around it, and I think that Hartford has a similar stigma, but I think that Hartford also has like a morale problem from within, right? People feeling like, there's not too much hope or places that they can go up. And I was wondering how you feel like being a developer can lift morale without, just trying to pander to the people from the outside that have the stigma. Like, how do you create developments that are for the people that are there and make them feel more excited about it without being like, I want to help the people from the wealthier white communities outside of it feel like, oh, this is just a better area now?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Do they still have, they have a building in Hartford called the Butt Ugly Building? Do you know this building? No?
The what building?
Butt Ugly. This may be before your time. You may be too young for this.
Fuller Brush?
It's just like some building that's like half demolished and it like fell apart.
There's a few.
Well, there was a building they called in Hartford the Butt Ugly Building. Like it was a part of how they described the building.
I think you're talking about Fuller Brush, but I could be wrong.
There may be, but the fact that it's I don't live in Hartford and I know about it. Because these areas do have stigma, right? So they have stigma, and that stigma isn't new. It's in existence for decades. And so I think it's important. I think you start with the people that are there. I think the projects should be for the people who are there first, and I try to do that. So even whether it's Hinchliffe Stadium, the senior housing, the stadium, the people who love Hinchliffe Stadium, the people who are, it had been closed for over 20-some years, and so you had to really be over 40 to remember what the building was. And really people who love the building in their 50s and 60s who remember playing football there or running track there or being in a band. So I think on one level you sort of start with the people who are there because the other part is that neighbors take time to change, The more challenging entity isn't just the people, the wealthy people, the more challenging entity is the banks. Like they're the ones who are sort of controlling the financing structure and whether or not the project will work with the demographics that's there. So that's why you end up with the financial stack that we have, because you have to sort of, if you're building it for the people that are there, they don't believe that the construction numbers or the development numbers are going to work unless you subsidize it all the way down. But, beyond that, I think if you sort of start, if you I think of the immediacy stuff too. Like, what can you do in the short term for people in the community? Some of that is jobs. Some of that is programming spaces. Some of that is local businesses that have access to the space. What can you do? Because even if even the neighborhood is changing and it's changing rapidly, it doesn't mean that the people who are there shouldn't be able to enjoy the spaces. So how do you program the spaces for them to enjoy? How do you have local businesses have access to the spaces so that they can have business, that people, and even if they're building it, and they can say, well, I was a part of the construction team over here, or my cousin has a cafe over there, or a part owner of the cafe over there, or my grandmother has a unit in that building. It's those things that integrated into the existing community as opposed to just sort of standing off of it. And I've seen there's some developers who do it well, and most developers don't.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
A few years ago, we heard from I think Damon Rich, who's with Hector. My question, another design team working in Newark, but my question is, you have done all of these amazing things, working at various levels. How do you collaborate with or see other players in the area? How do you meet with them, negotiate over where people are involved? There's probably enough work for everybody, but what is that scene beyond your own firm in terms of the other people operating in northern New Jersey, for instance?
Yeah, I have multiple overlaps with Damon. Damon was my planning director when I was a deputy mayor, so he worked for me back then. And then Damon's a Loeb fellow as well, so we work together. I've been doing a lot more mentorship. So what I'm doing now is working with a lot of younger Black and brown developers, just really more just as a sounding board. So there's a lot. When I was that age, I didn't have anyone to sort of talk to. So there's a bunch of different developers that I've been talking to who are in their 30s mostly, who have different types of projects. I've made my own professional commitment to working on projects in urban New Jersey. So I have projects in Atlantic City, Plainfield, Paterson. So I focus there, but I am sort of helping a lot of the younger developers work together. There's a lot of competition, and there's also a lot of there's a lot of sharks out there. So there's that environment exists in the context. I tend to partner with other developers as well on the projects, mostly because I haven't really had the capacity to sort of have a big infrastructure and the types of projects that I choose. But I do like to provide my expertise and relationships to developers, because I think that part's important. And the position in Newark again, Newark's the largest city in New Jersey. We had, when I was there, we had some of the most complicated deals that came through the state, was coming through across our desks. And so in that regard, I did get enough experience to help a lot of projects, be able to help a lot of developers figure out projects. And I think that's where my expertise lies. And it's oftentimes when someone may get stuck at a particular part of a particular issue, that's normally when I get called. Mm-hmm. But thank you.
If there are no other questions, again, thank you for really an inspiring as well as informative. I know this sounds a little bit hackneyed, but it's really wonderful to see the work you've been doing since you left here. So we'll re-meet at 2 in 105 for those who want to talk more one-on-one about Cornell, education, paths from, and anything else that was raised at today's symposium. So, again, thank you very much.
Thank you.